You're watching the Earth News Channel. You can change your world.
This is East to West with Roger Frampton, coming to you from our studios in spectacular Nova Scotia, Canada.
Hi, welcome to East to West. I'm Roger Frampton. Well, on today's newscast, we're going to look at a story that's coming from Canada. It's focusing on a bill, a legislative bill that's going through the Canadian Parliament, the Canadian government. The government's Prime Minister is Stephen Harper. And the bill is called Bill C-51. And it's been written to strengthen the abilities of the security services, their secret police and other services to combat the threats against terrorism from ISIS and other groups. But what it's more likely to do, it would appear, is reduce the rights and freedoms of Canadians. So that's our major story today. But first, we're going to take a look at a clip. Let me find that area here. Okay, it's coming up. So I'm going to show you this clip. I have a terrible fear of heights. And I remember going up in the Empire State Building in New York City, and I got out onto the deck and I freaked. I was almost ready to pass out. So not the best thing for me, but take a look at this. Boy, I would love to be able to do this.
Okay, sweet.
Have fun. It's Project Base, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, ready when you are.
Okay.
See ya.
Okay, gonna give a big countdown, dude. In 3, 2, 1, up high. Oh, I'm so scared.
Got the shot. Yes!
Wow, that took a lot of guts. How exciting. The only way to travel. So let's get on now with our major story. And it's about Bill C-51, the piece of legislation that's making its way through the Canadian Parliament. A number of Canadians in the last couple of weeks or so protested on the streets of Canada right across the country. Let's take a look.
I wish I wasn't here, to be honest. You know, we've been protesting this guy for years now and his agenda, and now we're seeing it in full fruition. Right now we've got helicopters overhead with Westcam mounts filming us protest. We have the police state right here. I mean, it's all for everyone's eyes to see. Within 2 minutes of walking in here, I had VPD on me asking me why I'm taking photos. It's a free country, as last I heard, but I'm like most Canadians. I'm disgusted with the agenda. I'm disgusted with the FIPA bill with communist China, dealing arms to Saudi beheaders, the robocalls, the Mike Duffy, the lying every day in Parliament. I mean, I could go on and on here for half an hour. It's absolutely ridiculous. And unfortunately, a lot of our countrymen, they trust their government. And people like us that actually watch Question Period instead of Honey Boo Boo, we follow Question Period and we watch the lies and we watch Harper change his story every day. So it's just the whole agenda. I'm here. I came by myself, actually. I'm happy to see that there's some other Vancouverites of conscience that are here standing up and sending him a loud message. But yeah, that's what we're doing here today, Glenn. Another protest of Stephen Harper.
I understand everybody here today that has taken the time to come out to stand in solidarity against a draconian piece of legislation that there's no doubt in my mind that if we put our minds together, we can defeat this government and we will eventually defeat this piece of legislation.
St. John's, Newfoundland, to Victoria, BC.
In my view, it's probably the most dangerous government piece of legislation in action since 400 people were arrested under the War Measures Act in 1970. On the oversight issues of CSIS, the legislation is totally inadequate. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada is opposed to some aspects of the legislation. He wanted to appear before the parliamentary committee and explain what he was concerned about. He's not getting to appear before the committee. The Conservatives are rushing this bill through committee, and they're not listening at all.
This is a defining moment for our political leaders to show who they are and what they stand for. And I am very proud to stand here with my NDP colleagues on behalf of our leader, Tom Mulcair, to say that we have to show the courage of our convictions.
The world has simply looked past the me that is me and the universe within. So let me begin by saying peace be upon you all. Salaam alaikum.
We don't need Bill C-51. We need Canada back. We need our freedom.
Well, as you can see there's a lot of disgruntled Canadians and very, very concerned about this Bill C-51. The bill itself is over 60 pages long, so it's a heavy read. And I'm just going to read a couple of points from it. That the bill drastically expands the definition of security. When you think of being secure, you're likely thinking of being safe from physical danger. But Bill C-51 defines security as not only safeguarding public safety, but also preventing interference with various aspects of public life, such as the economic or financial stability of Canada. Now, with that kind of definition, a protest that blocks traffic, that affects commerce, a protest around the transfer of oil from one place to another through a pipeline could be deemed to be affecting the economic stability of Canada, depending on how the government views that situation. And then another point here. It gives the government far too much discretion to pick and choose which individuals and groups are to be targeted for further scrutiny. Bill C-51 gives the government the ability to designate an extraordinary broad range of activities as potential security threats. So if your child at school with her friends is very concerned about the environment, and that was of concern to the government, she could be deemed potentially a security risk. So too students at university who are concerned about a number of different issues. So,
are you more concerned about making money for your selfish own self at the expense of everyone else than to help the world?
So, this is of great concern to a number of Canadians. I'm going to introduce you now to Joshua Blakeney. He's a geopolitical analyst. And Joshua is hopefully going to put it into a wider perspective for us. Hi, Josh. Could you give us your thoughts on Bill C-51?
Yes, well, Bill C-51 is the Harper regime's latest attempt to combat what they call terrorism. It's an anti-terrorism piece of legislation, ostensibly. And among other things, it will proscribe the legislation terms promoting or advocating for terrorism and disseminating terrorist propaganda. And I think many people find this problematic due to the reality that the Harper regime and other Canadian political actors, since the fraudulent events of 9/11, have proffered a very idiomatic and subjective definition of terrorism. For example, any group which in any way resists Israel in the Middle East is tagged by the Canadian government as a terrorist organization, and that has been enshrined in Canadian law. So, for example, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, all these groups are designated terrorist organizations by the Canadian government. And so one can imagine next time Israel decides to massacre the people of Palestine or the people of Lebanon, and Canadians are disgruntled with that and express opprobrium at those acts by the Israeli regime, and perhaps even advocate for Palestinian quote-unquote resistance to Israel, they could be deemed to be engaging in the promotion of terrorist propaganda by the Canadian authorities. And so, you know, obviously the war on terror has had two main thrusts. One has been the waging of aggressive wars abroad to implement what some would call Israel's foreign policy in the Middle East. You know, the Israeli government have been intent upon destabilizing the Middle East in recent years with the hope of weakening their those states that surround them so they can be hegemonic in their region. And so in terms of foreign policy, the British government and the Canadian government and the US government, it seems, have been waging wars on behalf of Israel in the Middle East. But concurrently, another thrust of this legislation and of similar pieces of legislation in different jurisdictions has been to atrophy civil liberties at home. And so I think you can't really understand pieces of legislation like this without grappling with the reality that Zionists wield an inordinate amount of power in Western countries, and that basically the people who are targeting the Palestinians and who are massacring the Palestinians are essentially the same people who control our polities. And I think that this is underscored by when we look at the tenets of this legislation. You know, I watched a TV report several years ago on how the Israeli so-called Defense Force was rounding up Palestinian protesters in the West Bank, and they were arresting them for quote-unquote promoting terrorist propaganda. So Palestinians who advocate for their indigenous political parties are thrown in jail in Palestine under the guise of combating terrorism.
Okay, so Bill C-51 has far greater implications than perhaps we realize inside of Canada. It's connected to expansion ideas that the Zionists in the Middle East have, and this is very complicated. Well, thanks for taking some of your time, Josh, to put this into a wider context for us.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, that's about it for East to West. I'm Roger Frampton. Please subscribe to our news magazine. It's at earthnewschannel.today, and you'll find a place to subscribe right there. We'll see you next time.